An old tablecloth, its lace edges already frayed, still lies in the judicial archives of the city of Leiden. Among its faded stains, people once found a darkened patch of liquid, seeping into the fibers like a small sign that death was drawing near. On a late October evening in 1883, a composed woman carried a steaming bowl of soup and set it before her trembling father-in-law. A bowl whose rich, spiced aroma masked a deadly intent. She offered a gentle smile and asked if he found it easier to eat than usual. He nodded in approval and then slowly drifted into unconsciousness. That ruthless woman was Maria Swanenburg. The neighbors had once considered her a model of compassion. They called her by the affectionate name Good Mie. She often visited struggling families, cared for the sick, and extended a helping hand to elderly people left alone. Yet beneath that veneer of concern lay a door that opened onto quiet deaths. Later experts argued that Maria was a product of a society full of cracks. As life insurance became widespread, it offered a chance of salvation for those driven to desperation. She was led, step by step, across the boundary of conscience by her own greed. But newspapers of the time claimed she was the embodiment of a cold-hearted evil, a person who deliberately sowed death with arsenic, then calmly counted each compensation payment. At the end of the 19th century, Leiden was a rapidly industrializing city, a place where newfound prosperity mingled with deep pockets of poverty. Within that picture, the name Maria Swanenburg seeped into every newspaper column, every whispered rumor, and came to haunt an entire generation. If you were to step into the room today, where she once tended to dozens of people nearing death, what would you see? A devoted woman worn down by sorrow, or a serial poisoner hiding behind a spotless apron? Maria Katharina Swanenburg was born on September 9th, 1839 in Leiden, the Netherlands. She grew up in a poor working-class family at the lower rungs of society. Her father, Clemens Swanenburg, was a toy maker, and her mother was Johanna Dingjohn. The entire family crowded together in a shabby workers' district of Leiden, where poverty and disease were everyday realities. Clemens often sank into heavy drinking, which kept the family's finances in constant turmoil. As one of 12 children, Maria witnessed 6 of her siblings die at an early age, a fate not uncommon amid the primitive medical care and harsh living conditions of the 19th century. At that time, the city of Leiden was undergoing significant economic upheaval. Once a prosperous center of textile production, the industry fell into decline by the mid-1800s. This collapse pushed many families into destitution. Slums spread across the city, and epidemics like cholera and smallpox raged through the overcrowded neighborhoods. All of it created a suffocating, decaying cityscape. Survival was a daily struggle. From an early age, Maria had to work to help support her family. She began as a laundress, a grueling job common among working-class women. Later, she shifted to caring for children and the sick in her neighborhood. This role helped her build the image of Good Mie, in the eyes of the community. In 1868, Maria married Johannes van der Linden, a porter by trade. They had 7 children together, but their married life was also full of hardship. The family remained poor. The costs of raising their children and the burden of household responsibilities weighed heavily on Maria's shoulders. Even so, she maintained an outwardly cheerful demeanor. She regularly helped her neighbors, tending to the ill and assisting families left alone in need. The image of a gentle woman, always ready to help, made her a reliable presence in the neighborhood. Maria's presence gradually became something many families could not do without. Besides tending to the sick, she was an attentive ear and a comforting hand. She offered words of reassurance when poverty had worn people's spirits thin. Neighbors recalled that some weeks she visited more than 10 households. She brought bread, soup, or small brown bottles of tonics. These were gathered from the donations of local charitable societies. Maria had a side of humanity that was hard to deny. She would sit patiently for hours beside the ill, offering soft words of comfort and at times convincing herself that she was helping them pass peacefully when their illness had no cure. This made her proud, especially when neighbors looked at her with grateful eyes. Occasionally, Maria would appear just as a family received a small insurance payment after the death of a relative, but at that time, no one paid attention to the coincidence. In their eyes, it was merely another gesture of care from the most trusted woman in Leiden. The name Good Mie gradually became the default way people spoke of compassion. Maria was proof that even in a cold city, there could still be a tender heart that asked for nothing in return. Yet it was precisely this trust that laid the perfect foundation, where tragedies could quietly grow day by day, waiting for their moment to be revealed. Maria did not grow up intending to harm anyone. For many years, she was simply a patient mother and wife, trying to keep her family from slipping further into poverty. Her relatives recalled that even in the worst of times, she would share the last piece of bread with her children. There were winter nights when she sat by her husband's bed, counting the few coins she had saved to buy coal for heat. When her husband became unable to work, Maria became the sole breadwinner for 7 children. The wages she earned from washing laundry and taking on extra jobs were never enough to cover the debts. The bills piled up into a stack of yellowed papers on the wooden table. They became an invisible burden that weighed on her shoulders for years. Every morning began with the same worries: how to feed the children, how to keep the house from being seized for unpaid debts, how to make today different from yesterday. She worked tirelessly, her hands rough and calloused from labor, but poverty clung to her like a relentless curse. Some believed it was despair itself that gradually changed her. At first, she only accepted charitable aid from relief organizations. Then she discovered that caring for the sick did not only bring her a good reputation, but sometimes came with small payments, a way to share the burden. When an old person died, the family often expressed their thanks with a few florins, a loaf of bread, or a sack of coal to keep warm. In the hardest years, those offerings were enough to help her family survive. Darkness began to creep into Maria's mind. In her thoughts, an idea slowly took shape, that death could become part of her livelihood. Perhaps it started with the gratitude families showed her. They believed she helped the dying pass peacefully. She became so accustomed to their thanks that she came to believe she was doing the right thing. Gradually, the line between duty and gain began to blur. Neighbors said there were days when Maria came home with a calm expression after watching someone slip away in her care. She still tended to her children, still sat mending clothes in the yellow glow of the oil lamp, as if nothing unusual had happened. In that house, the idea of guilt may have been worn away by years of deprivation and the endless struggle to survive. If Maria had grown up in a more prosperous family, in a Leiden less scarred by hardship, would she have fallen into darkness? Sadly, history does not allow for what if. In the early 1880s, the presence of Maria Katharina Swanenburg began to be associated with suspicious deaths. Those she cared for, from the frail elderly to small children, often died quickly after she appeared. One neighbor, after being tended by Maria for just a few days, suddenly slipped away in a fit of severe pain. He died only a few hours later. A child who had been feverish but seemed to be recovering abruptly went into convulsions and also passed away. The mortality rate around Maria was unusually high. The number of deaths far exceeded what could be blamed on epidemics or the harsh living conditions of the time. Families in the neighborhood began to sense that something was wrong. From 1880 to 1883, at least 27 people died after having contact with her. Dozens more were left in a critical state, their health permanently diminished. Whispers began to circulate throughout the neighborhood. Why is it that whenever she's there, people slip away so quickly? People muttered to each other in the marketplace. Some felt uneasy. They noticed that Maria's presence seemed to coincide with these sudden deaths. One elderly woman decided to change caregivers. Still, such suspicions remained only rumors. They were not strong enough to break the community's trust in the woman known for her tireless dedication. A few families grew cautious, but they did not dare to speak openly, partly because they feared being accused of slander, partly because Maria still maintained her respectable appearance. Ignoring the rumors, she continued her work, carrying a gentle smile and words of comfort wherever she went. Even so, some of her behaviors began to draw attention. Maria often took the initiative to suggest life insurance policies. She emphasized that these would help the families of the deceased avoid hardship later on. She also frequently mentioned funeral expenses, as if she had already calculated everything before the patient had even passed away. These small but peculiar details only fueled further suspicion. People also noticed that Maria always carried a small vial of medicine. She kept it carefully tucked inside her apron pocket and never allowed anyone to touch it. When she cooked soup or prepared tea for the sick, she insisted it was her special recipe. The wooden spoon she used was always cleaned with particular care. Some said that Maria would sometimes pressure the ill to eat a last meal. Even when they refused, she remained firm. These actions began to unsettle certain people. Little by little, some families found ways to keep their distance. They gently declined whenever Maria offered to care for their relatives. Yet most of the community remained blindly trusting. The image of Good Mie, the devoted woman who was always there when needed, was simply too powerful, concealing all the warning signs. If, back then, someone had found the courage to speak out, how many lives might have been saved? In December 1883, the curtain concealing Maria Katharina Swanenburg's crimes began to be pulled back. The Frankheisen family, who were fortunate enough to survive after being poisoned, immediately reported Maria to the authorities. Family members recalled that after Maria had tended to them, they suddenly experienced intense pain. They began vomiting and convulsing, symptoms that did not match their original illness. An experienced physician was called in. After examining them, he recognized the clear signs of arsenic poisoning. The constricted pupils, the garlic-like breath, and the unusually pale skin all pointed to the same cause. His suspicions grew, and he reported the case to the police. The authorities in Leiden opened an investigation. They began reviewing the deaths linked to Maria and discovered a series of suspicious fatalities stretching back to 1880. All the victims she had cared for had died with similar symptoms. The findings brought the investigation to a central question. Was Good Mie the one behind it all? Police searched Maria's home and quickly found disturbing evidence. In the small apartment, they discovered a glass jar containing a white powder. It was identified as arsenic, a common but deadly poison at the time. Investigators also seized life insurance records, in which Maria's name appeared as the beneficiary in multiple cases of death. These policies matched the list of deceased victims, ranging from her own parents to neighbors and young children in the neighborhood. Testimony from relatives and neighbors further strengthened the suspicion. Details emerged, such as how Maria often suggested buying insurance before the patient died, or how she insisted on personally preparing their food or medicine. Those actions had now become pieces of a ruthless scheme. When the police took Maria away, the crowd silently parted to either side. Some cast looks of anger, while others could only shake their heads in horror. The community of Leiden was stunned as news of the arrest spread. The woman who had once been called Good Mie was now revealed to be a murderer. the entire neighborhood sank into a sense of betrayal. Families who had entrusted their loved ones to Maria now faced a dreadful truth. They had unknowingly invited a killer into their homes. When she was arrested, Maria maintained a calm expression that chilled those around her. Records note that she immediately denied all charges. She answered questions with a composed demeanor. At times, she offered vague justifications about merely helping the sick. This coldness only deepened the investigators' sense of unease. The aftermath of the arrest quickly turned into widespread panic. Rumors that had once been mere whispers erupted into a wave of fear spreading across Leiden. In a city that had trusted her completely, did anyone stop to wonder whether, in their silence, they too had become accomplices to her crimes? In the summer of 1885, the courtroom in Leiden was packed with people attending the trial of Maria Katharina. A heavy atmosphere hung over the room. All eyes turned toward the woman once known as Good Mie. The Dutch press reported extensively, describing the case as one of the most horrifying crimes of the time. Before the court, Maria maintained an unsettling calm. When questioned, she denied most of the accusations. She insisted that she had only cared for the sick out of kindness and knew nothing about arsenic. Her defense strategy centered on blaming fate or natural illness. Maria emphasized that Leiden was already full of deaths caused by epidemics. However, Maria showed no clear signs of remorse. Historical records note that she answered questions in a cold, detached tone. At times, she deflected with vague replies, causing the judge and the public to grow increasingly resentful. Those present in the courtroom described her eyes as empty, as if she failed to grasp the cruelty of the acts she was accused of committing. The trial grew extremely tense as arguments erupted between the prosecutor and the defense attorney. The prosecutor, representing the authorities of Leiden, began in a firm, unyielding voice. He listed her crimes: poisoning with arsenic, targeting the most vulnerable to profit from insurance. He went on to present the evidence supporting his case. The jar of arsenic found in Maria's home, the life insurance policies naming her as the beneficiary. Alongside these were the crucial testimonies of survivors, like the Frankhuizen family. The prosecutor stressed that Maria had exploited the community's trust, turning the role of caregiver into a tool for murder. He demanded, how could a woman bring herself to poison her own relatives and neighbors for nothing more than a few coins? Despite facing overwhelming evidence, Maria's defense attorney continued to portray her as a victim of circumstance. He argued that the deaths were caused by common illnesses in Leiden, such as cholera or tuberculosis. The arsenic, he claimed, might have been a medicine she used to ease the pain of the sick. He also emphasized that there were no direct witnesses who had seen Maria administering poison. In particular, he insisted the insurance policies were merely her way of helping families prepare for the future. However, the prosecutor was no less determined. He presented the testimony of a neighbor who recalled how Maria had pressured the sick to drink her special medicine. At that point, the defense's arguments began to waver. When questioned, Maria denied all accusations. She insisted she had only fulfilled her role as a caregiver. The prosecutor leaned forward and spoke each word with deliberate emphasis. Caregiving? Or was it leading them to death? On May 1st, 1885, the court sentenced Maria to life in prison. It was the heaviest punishment allowed under Dutch law at the time. The case of Maria Katharina Swanenburg closed a dark chapter in the history of Leiden. The Dutch press continued to report on it for many months, calling her the black-clad phantom, the figure who had spread fear through the very streets that once trusted her without question. From a social perspective, the case exposed the fragility of impoverished communities like Leiden in the 1880s. In a city devastated by economic decline and disease, Maria became the symbol of a false hope. She filled the void left by a failing healthcare and welfare system. It was the community's desperation that allowed her crimes to take root. The case forced Dutch society to reflect on its harsh inequalities. Without poverty and with better social support, would Maria have had the chance to manipulate so much trust? From a moral standpoint, the case posed a question with no clear answer. How could a woman who once cared so devotedly for the sick turn that kindness into an instrument of murder? Maria not only exploited the community's faith, but also manipulated the very idea of compassion itself. She forced all of Leiden to wonder, is goodness always pure, or is it sometimes just a mask that conceals greed? From a psychological perspective, Maria's case evokes a haunting reflection on human nature. What could transform a mother who once struggled to raise her children into a killer who felt no remorse? Historical records show that Maria never admitted to her crimes. She always maintained a calm demeanor, as if she had created her own reality in which her actions were justified. The echoes of the case lingered for decades, not only in Leiden, but also in the minds of all who heard of Good Mie. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that kindness can be exploited and that humanity itself can be bent under the weight of circumstance. If you had once trusted someone completely, only to discover they had used that trust to do the unthinkable, could you ever forgive them, or would you forever lose your faith in others?